For close to 2 decades, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban were widely viewed as one of the entertainment industry's most enduring couples. Their relationship appeared to withstand every challenge that often destroys high-profile marriages, including worldwide fame, relentless public attention, demanding careers, and the passage of time itself. Whenever they appeared together at premieres or award ceremonies, they projected an image of effortless closeness. Keith would quietly lean toward Nicole, sharing words that instantly brought a smile to her face, while Nicole would gently place a hand against him and look at him with an expression that seemed to erase everyone else from the room. Their chemistry never appeared rehearsed. Instead, it conveyed a sense of comfort and familiarity that countless observers found genuine. To audiences around the world, they represented far more than another famous husband and wife. Their marriage came to symbolize the hope that authentic love could survive in an industry long associated with broken relationships and fleeting commitments. Yet, every polished photograph conceals moments that never become public. There are the silent journeys home after glamorous events, conversations left unfinished, and nights when two people occupy the same room while feeling emotionally worlds apart. Eventually, there comes a point when hidden realities can no longer remain concealed. Although Nicole Kidman has never publicly declared, "I cannot continue pretending," those words have often been used to describe the emotional narrative surrounding the reported conclusion of a marriage that many believed would endure forever. According to reports that emerged during September of the year 2025, the long-standing image of an unshakable union came to an end. After spending 19 years together as husband and wife, Nicole was said to have filed for divorce from Keith Urban, with irreconcilable differences listed as the legal basis for the separation. Such language is deliberately formal and emotionally detached. It offers no insight into the years they shared, the hardships they overcame, or the deeply personal pain that may have unfolded before such a life-changing decision was reached. It merely acknowledged what many people found difficult to accept: the couple would no longer continue their lives together as spouses. To understand why the reported separation resonated so strongly with the public, it is necessary to return to the earliest chapter of their relationship, long before anniversary tributes, family portraits, award ceremonies, and the carefully protected life they created in Nashville. Nicole and Keith first crossed paths during the year 2005 at a gathering in Los Angeles celebrating the achievements of Australians working abroad. By that time, Nicole had already established herself as one of the world's most respected and recognizable actresses. She had experienced an intensely public divorce from Tom Cruise and understood firsthand how quickly deeply personal experiences could become global headlines. Keith, meanwhile, had built an outstanding reputation within country music through his remarkable musicianship, engaging personality, and exceptional rapport with audiences. Despite his professional accomplishments, however, he was privately confronting significant personal challenges. Their introduction did not immediately blossom into the sweeping romance that would later capture public imagination. Nicole has recalled wondering why Keith delayed contacting her after they met, while Keith reportedly found it difficult to believe that someone of Nicole's stature could genuinely be interested in pursuing a relationship with him. Once they finally reconnected, however, their bond developed with remarkable speed and emotional intensity. Nicole would later describe the moment she realized she had found the man she wanted to spend her life with. Early on the morning of her birthday, Keith arrived unexpectedly at her home carrying flowers. The gesture was neither extravagant nor theatrical, yet it possessed the quiet sincerity of a memorable scene from a romantic film. Its simplicity, perfect timing, and heartfelt intention left a lasting impression. During the month of June in the year 2006, the couple exchanged wedding vows in Sydney in the presence of relatives and close friends. Their happiness, however, was almost immediately confronted by a serious challenge. Only a few months after the ceremony, Keith entered a rehabilitation program to address his struggles with substance abuse. For Nicole, this became the first major test of the promises she had recently made. Walking away would have been understandable, particularly given the uncertainty surrounding the situation. Instead, she remained beside him as he faced one of the most difficult periods of his life. Keith would later acknowledge that Nicole's encouragement, support, and determination played a vital role in helping him transform his future. Their relationship could no longer be viewed simply as another glamorous celebrity romance. It had already been shaped by fear, uncertainty, emotional vulnerability, and the painful recognition that genuine love cannot rescue someone who is unwilling to confront personal demons. Keith ultimately committed himself to that difficult process, while Nicole chose to stand beside him throughout the journey. Together, they gradually created a life intentionally separated from much of Hollywood's relentless spotlight. They established their home in Nashville, where Keith's musical career was firmly rooted and where they hoped to provide their growing family with a sense of stability and ordinary daily life that fame rarely allows. Their daughters, Sunday Rose and Faith Margaret, gradually became the heart of the family they worked so hard to protect. At the same time, both parents continued pursuing careers that demanded extraordinary commitment. Nicole maintained an exceptionally busy schedule, moving continuously between film productions, television projects, international premieres, promotional campaigns, and prestigious events around the world. Keith balanced an equally demanding professional life, recording new music, traveling extensively on concert tours, and performing before massive audiences across numerous countries. Despite the constant travel and professional obligations, they repeatedly emphasized that their marriage remained their highest priority. Rather than depending on text messages, they often spoke about making time for personal phone conversations. They explained that they carefully coordinated their calendars to prevent lengthy separations whenever possible. Public appearances reinforced the same impression. Nicole regularly attended Keith's concerts, while Keith frequently accompanied Nicole to film premieres and award ceremonies. Whenever one reached a new professional milestone, the other appeared sincerely delighted rather than overshadowed or competitive. For many years, there seemed to be little reason to question the authenticity of what they presented to the world. Yet no marriage can survive on carefully photographed moments alone. Life under constant public scrutiny introduces a unique form of separation. Two people may care deeply for one another while gradually experiencing entirely different emotional worlds. One partner may spend evenings under the bright lights of sold-out arenas, while the other disappears into the demanding process of becoming someone else on distant film sets. Both return physically exhausted, carrying burdens that are difficult for the other to fully understand. In the beginning, periods apart can strengthen a relationship by making reunions more meaningful. As time passes, however, distance itself can quietly become the defining feature of the marriage. By the year 2025, various reports claimed that Nicole and Keith had already been living separately for several months before news of their breakup reached the public. The disclosure surprised many admirers because there had been no highly publicized confrontation, no scandal dominating entertainment headlines, and no dramatic announcement suggesting that the relationship was approaching its conclusion. Instead, the marriage appeared to have unraveled slowly and almost invisibly behind closed doors. For many observers, that quiet ending made the story even more painful. Not every relationship is destroyed by infidelity, anger, or open hostility. Sometimes a marriage gradually weakens through prolonged absence, conversations that never truly happen, difficult decisions postponed again and again, and two individuals slowly building separate lives without fully realizing how far apart they have grown. By the time the public became aware of the situation, it appeared that Nicole and Keith had already reached a point where reconciliation no longer seemed possible. For an actress who had spent decades portraying powerful emotions before cameras, this was an intensely personal experience that required no performance whatsoever. The marriage itself had reportedly come to an end, yet one question continued to dominate public discussion. How could a relationship that had long been considered one of Hollywood's strongest arrive at a stage where remaining together felt more difficult than parting ways? Many people searched for a single dramatic explanation. They expected a shocking betrayal, a hidden conflict, or one final conversation capable of explaining how nearly 2 decades of marriage could appear to dissolve so quickly. Real relationships, however, rarely fall apart because of one isolated event. More often, the ending begins almost imperceptibly. A conversation postponed today becomes another postponed tomorrow. Weeks spent apart quietly become months. Demanding careers establish separate routines, separate friendships, separate responsibilities, and eventually entirely different ideas of what home feels like. The official explanation associated with the reported divorce remained irreconcilable differences. That phrase became the only formal description available to the public. It identified no affair, no single life-changing incident, and no obvious individual responsible for the breakdown of the relationship. The absence of a clear explanation inevitably encouraged widespread speculation, and in Hollywood, unanswered questions rarely remain unanswered for long. Rumors quickly circulated through entertainment media. Anonymous sources offered competing interpretations of what had taken place behind the scenes. Some accounts suggested that Nicole had been reluctant to accept the end of the marriage and continued, hoping there was still a path toward reconciliation. Others portrayed the separation as the result of a gradual emotional drift rather than one explosive confrontation. Despite the countless headlines and speculative reports, however, neither Nicole nor Keith ever released the deeply personal confession that many sensational stories implied existed. There has been no verified public statement in which Nicole declared, "I can't pretend anymore." What remained was the difficult reality that, whatever had unfolded between them, both appeared to have reached the conclusion that rebuilding their marriage was no longer possible. Reports published after news of the separation became public indicated that the couple had already been living apart during part of the summer of the year 2025. Their last public appearance together had taken place months before anyone outside their closest circle realized the relationship was coming to an end. That revelation dramatically changed how people interpreted the photographs from those final appearances. Images that had once been viewed as ordinary expressions of affection suddenly became objects of intense scrutiny. Every smile, every glance, and every subtle gesture was examined for hidden meaning. Admirers searched Nicole's expression for signs of quiet heartbreak while studying Keith's face for evidence of emotional distance, as though the ending had always been visible and everyone had simply overlooked it. Yet photographs rarely tell the complete story. Two people may smile sincerely in front of cameras and later return home to conversations filled with uncertainty. They may continue caring deeply for one another while privately recognizing that their marriage can no longer provide the future they once imagined. Holding hands can reflect love, familiarity, mutual respect, or even a shared determination to shield their children from painful realities that have not yet become public. The conclusion of a marriage does not necessarily mean that love has disappeared. Sometimes affection remains, but it is no longer powerful enough to overcome the gradual changes created by time, exhaustion, and emotional distance. Throughout the years, Nicole and Keith had spoken candidly about the effort required to keep their relationship strong despite demanding careers. Their professional lives rarely allowed them to remain in one place for long. Nicole often spent months immersed in film productions, devoting herself completely to characters whose emotional weight frequently extended beyond the set. Keith's career required extensive touring, carrying him from one city to another before enormous audiences while separating him from the ordinary rhythms of family life. In earlier years, they had transformed those challenges into evidence of their commitment. They maintained frequent phone conversations, carefully organized their schedules, and crossed continents whenever possible to spend time together. What once felt romantic, however, could gradually become emotionally draining after being repeated year after year. Every reunion inevitably led to another farewell, and each departure required another period of adjustment. Over time, two people may become remarkably capable of managing life on their own. That independence can strengthen a relationship, yet it can also make the prospect of living separately seem less unimaginable than it once did. By the time Nicole reportedly filed for divorce on the 30th day of September in the year 2025, many of the most significant decisions had apparently already been resolved behind closed doors. Reports suggested that both parties had completed and signed the necessary agreements before the legal filing became public knowledge. Arrangements concerning property, financial responsibilities, and the care of their children were said to have been settled without the prolonged courtroom conflict that often accompanies high-profile celebrity divorces. The careful preparation implied a process shaped by deliberation rather than impulse. Nothing suggested a sudden emotional outburst followed immediately by legal action. Instead, the available information pointed toward months of private conversations, thoughtful negotiations, and difficult decisions completed long before the public became aware that the marriage had reached its conclusion. That level of organization should never be mistaken for emotional detachment. In many ways, it may reflect an even deeper form of heartbreak. One can only imagine the quiet difficulty of sitting across from the person who once promised to share an entire lifetime, calmly discussing future holidays, parenting arrangements, family homes, and the practical division of nearly 2 decades spent building a life together. Every document signed represents more than a legal requirement. It quietly acknowledges that a shared future has become two separate futures. Despite the reported end of their marriage, both Nicole and Keith appeared committed to protecting their daughters from unnecessary conflict. According to published reports, their parenting agreement emphasized cooperation and specifically discouraged either parent from speaking negatively about the other in the children's presence. Neither was reported to have pursued spousal support, and the settlement avoided the prolonged financial disputes that have overshadowed many other celebrity separations. The conclusion of their marriage, therefore, appeared measured, respectful, and carefully managed rather than openly hostile. Even so, composure should never be confused with the absence of sorrow. A separation handled with dignity can still carry profound grief, particularly when it marks the end of a relationship that had once seemed capable of lasting a lifetime. Nicole had already experienced the painful end of a marriage while the entire world watched. She knew better than most how quickly private heartbreak could be transformed into sensational headlines, endless speculation, and public entertainment. When news of her reported separation from Keith emerged, she chose a very different response. There were no public accusations, no emotionally charged interviews, and no attempt to explain in detail what had supposedly gone wrong. For those hoping for scandal, her silence offered little satisfaction. Yet that restraint may have revealed more than any public statement ever could. Rather than fighting to shape the narrative, she appeared focused on protecting herself, her children, and the people closest to her as they navigated an intensely personal transition. Behind the carefully worded legal documents, the measured public statements, and the deliberate absence of blame lay a far more profound emotional question. What does a person do when the individual who once helped rebuild a broken life becomes someone whose absence must now become part of everyday existence? That possibility alone had the power to reopen emotional wounds that had taken many years to understand and accept. Long before Keith Urban became part of her story, Nicole had already endured the collapse of a marriage she once believed would last forever. The ending of that earlier relationship unfolded beneath relentless international attention, forcing her to reconstruct both her personal life and public identity while millions of strangers debated deeply private experiences. By the time Keith entered her life, she appeared to be searching for something fundamentally different. She no longer seemed interested in another relationship defined by celebrity headlines or constant public fascination. What she appeared to want was stability, security, and the feeling of belonging somewhere beyond the spotlight. Many believed she discovered that sense of home alongside Keith. Their life in Nashville provided a degree of privacy that Hollywood could rarely offer. Together, they raised their daughters at a distance from much of the constant attention that accompanies celebrity life. Nicole was able to move between major international film productions and a quieter family environment where professional success was not meant to dominate every conversation or every moment. Throughout the years, she consistently spoke about Keith with obvious affection and deep appreciation. He was far more than her husband in those descriptions. She often portrayed him as the person who made her feel emotionally secure, genuinely understood, and firmly grounded during periods of enormous professional pressure and deeply personal loss. She frequently credited their relationship with providing stability whenever the demands of her career or challenges within her family became especially difficult. Perhaps that is why reports of their separation proved so difficult for many people to understand. It seemed almost impossible to imagine willingly walking away from the person who had once helped replace loneliness with hope. Equally difficult was reconciling the image of the man standing in the present with the memory of the man who had unexpectedly arrived carrying flowers on her birthday, renewing her belief that lasting love was still possible. The answer, however, may not lie in the disappearance of love itself. It is entirely possible for affection to remain while the marriage that once held it together gradually becomes unsustainable. Love and marriage, though deeply connected, are not always identical. One can survive even after the other has reached its conclusion. There is a unique form of grief that accompanies losing someone who is still very much alive. The familiar voice remains unchanged. Shared memories continue to shape nearly every significant chapter of adult life. When children are involved, complete separation is neither possible nor necessarily desirable. Responsibilities continue. Conversations continue. A shared history cannot simply be erased because legal documents declare that a marriage has ended. What disappears instead is the future once imagined together. The anniversaries that would have been celebrated never arrive. The ordinary mornings once pictured decades into the future vanish before they can exist. The comforting certainty that, regardless of whatever challenges the outside world might present, one particular person will always be waiting at home gradually fades away. In that sense, divorce represents more than the conclusion of a legal partnership. It marks the loss of an entire future that both people had once believed they would share. For nearly 19 years, Nicole had reportedly envisioned that future alongside Keith. Yet when she returned to public life following reports of the separation, she did not appear broken. She continued fulfilling professional commitments, attended industry events, remained actively involved in the lives of her daughters, and stayed close to her family. Some observers interpreted that composure as evidence of remarkable resilience. Others saw something different, the carefully disciplined expression of a woman who had learned through previous experience that the deepest wounds are often carried quietly until they have had time to heal. As an actress, Nicole has spent much of her career portraying profound emotional suffering on screen. Away from the cameras, however, genuine heartbreak requires no performance at all. On screen, emotion follows a script. An actor knows precisely when a scene begins, when it ends, and how many opportunities remain to perfect a performance. Real heartbreak offers none of those comforts. There is no director calling for another take, no carefully arranged lighting to disguise exhaustion, and no opportunity to rewrite the outcome. Beyond the elegance of red carpet appearances, designer gowns, and composed public smiles, Nicole was reportedly confronting the deeply personal loss of a relationship that had shaped nearly 2 decades of her life. The phrase, "I can't pretend anymore," resonated with so many people not because it was ever confirmed as something she actually said, but because it seemed to capture the emotional moment when hope gives way to acceptance. Such a statement does not suggest surrender to failure. Instead, it reflects surrender to reality after every reasonable effort has already been made. For many years, Nicole and Keith appeared determined to preserve the life they had built together. They reportedly organized demanding schedules, placed the well-being of their daughters above everything else, and worked continuously to prevent the physical distance created by their careers from becoming emotional separation. Yet there comes a point in some relationships when maintaining the appearance of closeness demands more emotional energy than honestly acknowledging that something fundamental has changed. Pretending is not always about misleading other people. Often it is something people do for themselves. They reassure themselves that exhaustion is only temporary. They blame emotional distance on demanding careers or hectic schedules. They become convinced that the next vacation, the next anniversary, or a quieter season at home will somehow restore what has slowly been slipping away. Memories of happier times become a source of hope, creating the belief that the beginning of the relationship can somehow be recreated. Memories alone, however, cannot sustain a marriage. A lasting relationship depends on 2 people continuing to choose the same future, again and again. If the reports surrounding the year 2025 accurately reflected their situation, it may simply have been that Nicole and Keith could no longer make that choice together. Such an ending does not require the existence of a villain. nor does it invalidate everything that came before. The years they shared remain part of their lives. The support they offered one another was genuine. The family they created together was real. The joy captured in countless photographs does not become false simply because the relationship eventually reached its conclusion. A love story does not lose its authenticity merely because it fails to last forever. Perhaps that is one of the most difficult realities for people to accept. Many judge an entire marriage solely by the way it ends. When a relationship concludes with divorce, they often assume everything that came before must have been a mistake. Yet nearly 19 years of shared life cannot be reduced to a single legal document. Within those years existed recovery, parenthood, professional achievement, personal disappointment, laughter, compromise, resilience, and countless private moments that only the two people involved will ever fully understand. The reported divorce did not erase that history. Instead, it changed the way that history would be remembered. Nicole was then faced with another deeply personal challenge, rediscovering who she was beyond the identity of Keith Urban's wife. She remained an accomplished actress, a devoted mother, a daughter, a sister, and a woman whose ambitions had existed long before the marriage began. Even so, rebuilding a life at this stage carried a very different emotional weight than it had years earlier. She was no longer the younger woman navigating the aftermath of her first divorce. Time had given her greater responsibilities, a lifetime of shared memories, and a clearer understanding of how unexpectedly life can change. Perhaps, this time, she no longer needed someone else to rescue her from uncertainty. Perhaps the greatest lesson emerging from the reported separation was discovering the ability to remain emotionally whole even when the future no longer resembled the one she had imagined. The public continued searching for a definitive explanation. Nicole, however, offered almost none. Her silence carried its own quiet message. It reflected dignity, restraint, and perhaps a reminder that the deepest truths about a marriage belong first to the two individuals who lived it rather than to those watching from a distance. Whatever ultimately happened between Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban, the most painful moment may not have been the legal ending of the relationship itself. It may instead have been the gradual realization that the life they had spent so many years protecting had already begun to disappear long before either of them found the strength to acknowledge that it was over. Even after the reports became public, interviewers continued hoping that one day one of them would finally reveal the complete story. Following the reports of the separation, journalists continued searching for answers. Entertainment programs analyzed every public appearance, while social media users revisited years of photographs, award ceremony speeches, interviews, and red carpet moments, convinced that somewhere within those memories a forgotten clue would reveal exactly when the relationship had begun to change. Every smile was re-examined. Every glance became the subject of speculation. Many believed that, if they looked closely enough, the truth would eventually reveal itself. Nicole, however, declined to provide the dramatic narrative so many people expected. She made no public accusations against Keith Urban. She offered no emotional interview cataloging years of disappointment, nor did she transform the end of her marriage into a carefully managed publicity campaign. Rather than competing for sympathy or attempting to dominate headlines with intimate revelations, she chose restraint. For someone whose profession depended upon communicating the deepest human emotions, that silence spoke volumes. Throughout her career, Nicole had portrayed women confronting grief, isolation, obsession, violence, impossible decisions, and profound emotional loss. She possessed the rare ability to communicate an entire inner world through the smallest expression. Yet when the pain belonged to her own life, she declined to perform it for an audience. Perhaps she understood that no public explanation could ever satisfy everyone. A gentle account might have been dismissed as incomplete. An angry statement could have reduced nearly 2 decades of marriage to a single moment of bitterness. Defending Keith might have invited accusations that she was concealing the truth, while criticizing him would almost certainly have transformed an intensely private experience into a public trial judged by strangers who had never witnessed the reality of their lives together. Remaining silent allowed at least one part of their shared history to remain beyond public consumption. That choice also reflected another priority. Their daughters, Sunday Rose and Faith Margaret, were not public figures participating in a celebrity drama. They were children adapting to a profound change within their family. They would now face life divided between separate homes, different daily routines, and the understanding that their parents would no longer share the future they had once imagined together. Every decision Nicole and Keith made therefore carried consequences extending far beyond their own heartbreak. They could not simply disappear from each other's lives. Birthdays would continue to be celebrated. School events would still require cooperation. Holidays would still demand thoughtful planning. Most importantly, their daughters would continue loving both parents regardless of whatever had happened between them. That reality required remarkable self-restraint. After a painful separation, it is often tempting to reveal every grievance and seek validation from the outside world. Yet winning public sympathy can sometimes come at the expense of something infinitely more valuable, allowing children the freedom to love both parents without feeling that loyalty to one requires betraying the other. Nicole appeared to choose that more difficult path, moving forward without publicly attacking the man she had once described as the great love of her life. There is undeniable dignity in such restraint. Even so, dignity offers no protection against grief. When a relationship has shaped nearly 20 years of life, its absence reveals itself everywhere. It appears in the empty place at the dinner table, in the instinctive desire to share a thought with someone who is no longer waiting at home, and in familiar songs, private jokes, treasured traditions, and ordinary household objects that unexpectedly become reminders of what has been lost. The most painful moments rarely unfold before cameras. More often, they arrive during quiet evenings after work has ended and every distraction has disappeared. During those silent hours, a person must face not only the loss itself, but also the recognition that certain parts of the past can never be recovered. The beginning of Nicole and Keith's relationship had once symbolized renewed hope. Keith entered her life at a time when she was prepared to believe once again that love could offer security rather than heartbreak. Together they built a family and created a home that appeared capable of surviving almost anything. When a relationship like that reaches its conclusion, the pain extends beyond losing another person. It also changes the way memories themselves are experienced. Moments once accepted without question begin inviting painful uncertainty. Was the happiness entirely genuine? When did emotional distance first begin? Could different choices have altered the outcome? Did one person quietly stop fighting while the other remained unaware? Questions such as these rarely provide comfort. Instead, they continue returning, searching for answers that may no longer exist. Perhaps that is another reason Nicole chose not to explain everything publicly. Real relationships seldom end because of one simple event that can be summarized in a single sentence. There may never have been one specific moment she could point to and declare, "This is where everything changed." A marriage often weakens gradually through countless disappointments too small to attract attention on their own. Long periods apart, emotional fatigue, shifting priorities, changing ambitions, and the quiet realization that two people no longer experience the relationship in the same way may individually seem manageable. Together, however, they can slowly become impossible to overcome. Viewed through that perspective, the imagined words, "I can't pretend anymore," represent something far deeper than a dramatic farewell. They symbolize the moment when hope quietly transforms into denial. Eventually, repeating that everything is fine no longer protects the relationship. It merely postpones the difficult acceptance that something essential has already changed. Nicole may have spent many months trying to understand that transformation. She may have searched for the man she first fell in love with, while Keith may have searched for the version of their shared life that once gave both of them a sense of stability and belonging. Yet people inevitably change. Careers evolve. Children mature. Priorities shift. Dreams that once moved in the same direction sometimes begin leading toward different futures. In the end, two individuals can continue respecting and even caring deeply for one another while discovering that they are preserving the memory of a relationship rather than truly living within it. That realization often feels like personal failure, even when it is not. Choosing honesty under such circumstances may require greater courage than continuing to maintain a beautiful illusion. Nicole had spent much of her life surrounded by cameras, telling stories carefully designed to persuade audiences to believe in impossible endings. Real life, however, offers no perfectly written final act. There is no unforgettable speech capable of repairing years of emotional distance, no orchestral music announcing reconciliation, and no last-minute embrace that restores everything that has been lost. Sometimes, two people simply reach the painful understanding that the love which once rescued them is no longer enough to sustain the life they built together. As Nicole stepped into an uncertain new chapter, one quiet truth seemed impossible to ignore. The most heartbreaking farewells are not always spoken in anger. They are often expressed with compassion, after both people have realized that remaining together would require pretending that nothing has changed. According to reports, when the legal process concluded, there was no dramatic reunion waiting outside the courtroom, no emotional confession, and no miraculous conversation capable of reversing nearly 2 decades of shared history. On the 6th day of January in the year 2026, a court in Nashville reportedly finalized the dissolution of Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban's marriage, formally restoring their status as unmarried individuals. Published reports stated that their agreement resolved issues relating to property, waived both child and spousal support obligations, and identified Nicole as the primary residential parent of their 2 teenage daughters. From a legal perspective, the process appeared orderly and carefully negotiated. Human lives, however, cannot be divided with the same precision as financial assets. No legal document can determine who keeps the memory of a first wedding dance, the quiet moments that shaped a family, or the invisible history 2 people carried together for nearly 20 years. No legal agreement can determine who keeps the memories of laughter shared during family vacations, the quiet conversations that continued long after midnight, or the familiar comfort of hearing another person's footsteps moving through the house. A court may officially dissolve a marriage, but it cannot erase the life that existed before the judgment. For Nicole, the most difficult decision had already been made. The challenge that remained was learning to wake each morning inside a future that no longer resembled the one she had spent nearly 20 years expecting. Keith had been woven into the rhythm of her everyday life for almost 2 decades. He had shared moments of extraordinary professional success, painful personal loss, family celebrations, and the relentless pressures that accompany international fame. Together, they had endured demanding careers, long periods apart, and the constant public attention capable of transforming even ordinary disagreements into worldwide speculation. Now, the woman who had once described marriage as her emotional refuge reportedly faced the task of creating a new sense of security without it. That process rarely begins with confidence. More often, it begins with survival. It means making it through another morning without replaying the last difficult conversation. It means sitting at a family table where someone who always belonged is no longer there. It means making decisions that were once shared and answering well-meaning questions from friends while still struggling to understand the experience yourself. Society often celebrates a divorced woman's independence. Strength, elegance, and resilience become the qualities most frequently praised. Yet strength should never be mistaken for the absence of sorrow. Sometimes true resilience means allowing yourself to grieve in private while still finding the courage to be fully present for your children the next morning. At other times, it means resisting the temptation to explain everything publicly, even when silence allows strangers to invent far harsher versions of the story than reality might ever justify. It can also mean accepting that closure does not always arrive in the form people hope for. Nicole did not appear to view the end of the marriage as a victory or a defeat. There was nothing to win. A family had changed forever. A partnership that once seemed permanent had reached its conclusion. 2 individuals who had imagined growing old together now faced the responsibility of building separate futures without allowing their shared history to become a battlefield. According to published reports, their parenting arrangements emphasized mutual support for their daughters' relationships with both parents and discouraged negative comments about one another. That obligation reflected more than legal language. It acknowledged an enduring reality. Although their roles as husband and wife had reportedly ended, their responsibilities as mother and father would continue for the rest of their lives. Perhaps that became the most meaningful promise remaining between them. They could no longer preserve the marriage itself, but they still possessed the ability to protect the family it had created. For Sunday Rose and Faith Margaret, birthdays, graduations, family holidays, and countless future milestones would continue to arrive. Their parents would still be expected to stand together when necessary, placing their daughter's well-being above any lingering personal pain. Co-parenting, therefore, required a different expression of love. It was no longer romantic affection or the warmth displayed on red carpets before photographers. Instead, it became a quieter form of respect, one capable of surviving disappointment and preserving dignity for the sake of those they loved most. Nicole also faced another deeply personal journey, rediscovering aspects of herself that had gradually become intertwined with the identity of being someone's wife. Long before Keith entered her life, she had already established herself as Nicole Kidman, an actress whose career had been built through discipline, artistic courage, and an extraordinary willingness to portray women who were complex, emotionally wounded, and often misunderstood. She had survived public judgment before, and she had rebuilt her life after profound loss. Yet rebuilding never means returning unchanged. This time, she carried nearly 19 additional years of experience. She understood the extraordinary joy of loving and being loved deeply. She also understood the emotional fatigue that can accompany the effort required to balance two demanding lives. Perhaps most importantly, she knew that even relationships founded upon genuine devotion can arrive at endings that neither person could have imagined when everything first began. Perhaps the lesson was never that love itself had failed. Perhaps it was simply that love can evolve into something different, and refusing to acknowledge that transformation only prolongs suffering. The phrase, "I can't pretend anymore," remains an interpretation rather than a verified public statement. Even so, it symbolizes an emotional threshold many people eventually confront. It represents the point where preserving the appearance of a marriage begins to require sacrificing one's own emotional well-being. It marks the difficult transition between remembering who someone once was and accepting who both people have gradually become. It also reflects the realization that profound loneliness can sometimes exist even within a marriage. Whatever the future held, Nicole's next chapter appeared destined to begin not with another romantic relationship, but with herself. Motherhood, family, meaningful work, and the search for lasting peace would become the foundations upon which that new chapter was built. Audiences had watched her portray women emerging transformed after unimaginable hardship. This time, there was no fictional character standing between the actress and reality. Whatever challenges lay ahead belonged entirely to Nicole herself. Yet although the reported marriage had ended, her story clearly had not. For the first time in almost 20 years, its direction appeared to belong solely to her. While much of the public conversation naturally focused on Nicole, Keith Urban was also confronting the end of a life he had spent nearly 2 decades building. To many observers, he had always appeared to be the more openly affectionate partner. During interviews, he regularly spoke about Nicole with gratitude, admiration, and obvious warmth. On red carpets and at award ceremonies, he often seemed eager to remind people that one of the greatest sources of strength in his life was the woman standing beside him. Nicole entered Keith's life during one of its most vulnerable periods. Soon after their wedding, she reportedly supported him through a deeply personal crisis that threatened not only their marriage, but also his future. Keith later acknowledged the importance of her encouragement throughout his recovery. To him, she represented far more than a celebrated actress or devoted spouse. She became closely associated with the stability he eventually found. That shared history made the reported separation far more complex than a simple story about two celebrities drifting apart. Keith was not merely losing a marriage. He was also saying goodbye to the person whose presence had become inseparable from one of the most significant transformations of his life. Over the years, their relationship became deeply woven into his public identity. Fans frequently interpreted his songs as tributes to Nicole, while speeches and interviews often included heartfelt references to her influence. Many came to believe that his devotion was permanent because it seemed inseparable from both his music and his sense of self. Yet gratitude alone cannot sustain a marriage indefinitely. A relationship cannot continue forever simply because one partner once helped save the other. Eventually, both individuals must continue meeting each other as they are in the present rather than relying exclusively on the meaning of the past. Shared history may explain why difficult years were survived, but it cannot always bridge emotional distance that develops over time. Like Nicole, Keith offered no detailed public explanation regarding the reported breakdown of the marriage. He avoided transforming private experiences into public accusations. His silence inevitably encouraged speculation. Some interpreted his continued performances as evidence that he had recovered quickly. Others searched his lyrics, interviews, facial expressions, and stage presence for hidden signs of regret or grief. Every emotional song became a possible confession. Every subtle change in expression was treated as evidence of pain concealed beneath the surface. Performing before an audience, however, should never be confused with healing. A musician can stand before thousands of cheering people and still return afterward to a home that feels painfully quiet. He can sing about love night after night while privately mourning the person who once gave those words their deepest meaning. A concert follows a familiar structure. Each performance has a beginning, a climax, and an ending. Audiences respond in predictable ways, and music creates an environment where emotion can be carefully shaped into something beautiful. Life after divorce offers no comparable order. There is no rehearsal for explaining profound family changes to children, no carefully arranged performance capable of restoring what has already ended, and no encore that brings a marriage back once its final chapter has been written. Keith's public restraint appeared to reflect the same priority many observers associated with Nicole, protecting their daughters from becoming unwilling participants in their parents' private pain. Whatever disappointments may have existed between them, they still shared responsibilities far greater than satisfying public curiosity. Their challenge was learning how to separate without teaching their children that every love story must inevitably end in anger or cruelty. Doing so required remarkable discipline. It required resisting the impulse to answer every rumor, accepting that strangers would almost certainly misunderstand important parts of the story, and continuing to speak about one another with dignity, even during moments of private emotional struggle. Many people searched for someone to blame. Yet perhaps there was never a single villain. Perhaps there were only two individuals who spent years trying to preserve a relationship challenged by distance, demanding careers, exhaustion, and the natural changes that occur over nearly 2 decades of shared life. Keith's profession required constant movement. Touring meant living in arenas, airports, hotels, and unfamiliar cities for extended periods. Nicole's work demanded immersion in an entirely different world of scripts, filming locations, production schedules, and emotionally demanding roles. For many years, they appeared to manage that rhythm successfully. Managing it, however, is not necessarily the same as remaining emotionally close. Two people may become exceptionally skilled at maintaining the practical structure of a marriage while quietly losing the intimacy that once made every sacrifice worthwhile. Calendars continue to be coordinated. Anniversaries continue to be celebrated. Public appearances continue whenever necessary. Both partners reassure themselves that the difficult period is only temporary. Yet sometimes that difficult season never truly ends. Eventually, they may discover that they have become highly effective partners in raising a family while no longer experiencing the emotional connection that first brought them together. That realization is devastating precisely because affection may still remain. Keith may still have admired Nicole deeply. Nicole may still have cared profoundly for Keith. Respect and affection, however, do not always possess the power to overcome years of gradual emotional separation. Perhaps that explains why so many people struggled to understand the reported ending of their relationship. Audiences have become accustomed to divorce stories defined by scandal, betrayal, anger, and dramatic revelations. Nicole and Keith appeared to offer something very different: the the possibility that a marriage can reach its natural conclusion without destroying the mutual respect that once sustained it. Keith now faced his own uncertain future. The woman who had stood beside him throughout recovery would reportedly no longer be waiting at the end of every journey. The family home would inevitably carry a different meaning. Traditions would remain, but they would now be experienced through an entirely new emotional reality. He would continue being a father. He would continue creating music and performing before appreciative audiences. Yet behind those familiar routines was reportedly a man learning to separate gratitude from dependence and treasured memories from present reality. Nicole had once helped him rebuild his life. Now he appeared to face the challenge of rebuilding once more without expecting her to remain responsible for that process. Perhaps that became the final expression of love between them. Not clinging to the past at any cost. Not allowing resentment to erase everything beautiful they had shared. Instead, releasing one another before bitterness could overshadow nearly 2 decades of genuine history. The reported marriage may have reached its conclusion, but the dignity with which both appeared to handle that ending may ultimately shape how their story is remembered. Their history could become either a source of lingering resentment or a reminder that even relationships which do not last forever may still contain grace, gratitude, and authentic love. For almost 20 years, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban seemed to embody a rare kind of partnership capable of surviving the extraordinary pressures of fame. They overcame early hardships, created a family together, traveled across continents to remain connected, celebrated one another's achievements, and repeatedly described their marriage as the safest place in their lives. Then, quietly and far from public view, that sense of certainty reportedly began to disappear. The reported ending of their marriage does not automatically transform every affectionate photograph into a staged performance. It does not suggest that every promise lacked sincerity or that every anniversary tribute concealed dishonesty. Instead, it reflects a more difficult truth. Two people may genuinely love one another and still eventually discover that they can no longer continue sharing life as husband and wife. People naturally prefer simple conclusions. Relationships are expected to fit neatly into categories such as success or failure, lasting love or deception, hero or villain. The story associated with Nicole and Keith appears to resist those easy definitions. Their marriage reportedly lasted 19 years. During that time, they faced challenges that might have ended many other relationships far earlier. Nicole supported Keith throughout recovery. Keith provided stability during periods of professional pressure and personal loss. Together, they raised 2 daughters and built a family life that, for many years, appeared deeply meaningful to both of them. Whatever ultimately happened afterward cannot erase the significance of those years. They remain an enduring part of both lives, regardless of how the story eventually continued. Those years cannot simply be dismissed because the story eventually reached its conclusion through divorce. If anything, the deepest sadness lies elsewhere. The tragedy was never that the marriage had been empty from the beginning. It was that it had once been filled with genuine love, trust, and hope. Their memories were real. The bond they created was real. They had invested years protecting what they built together, and that is precisely why letting it go was so extraordinarily difficult. When reports began claiming that Nicole had finally revealed why she could no longer continue, countless sensational headlines promised readers an explosive confession. The stories suggested that, after years of silence, one hidden truth had finally come to light. Yet no verified public statement has ever shown Nicole using the words, "I can't pretend anymore." Those words remain a dramatic interpretation rather than an authenticated quotation. Even so, the phrase continues to resonate because it reflects an emotional experience that extends far beyond one's celebrity marriage. Pretending does not always involve deceiving the outside world. More often, it involves convincing yourself that emotional distance is only temporary, believing that demanding careers explain every growing silence, assuming that years of shared history automatically guarantee years still to come, or persuading yourself that remaining together is always kinder than admitting that both people have quietly become unhappy. Eventually, honesty begins demanding sacrifices that once seemed unimaginable. If the widely reported accounts surrounding Nicole and Keith are accurate, that sacrifice was the life they had spent nearly 19 years creating together. The future they once imagined would now unfold differently. Separate homes would replace one shared household. Daily routines would no longer overlap in the same way. Plans once built together would gradually become individual journeys. Yet not everything ended with the marriage. Their lives would continue intersecting through the two daughters they both loved deeply. Birthdays, graduations, family celebrations, and countless milestones still lay ahead. They would meet again, no longer as husband and wife, but as parents united by responsibilities that divorce could never erase. Those moments would undoubtedly carry emotional complexity. At the same time, they also offered the possibility of proving that respect can survive even after a marriage cannot. The challenge before them was no longer finding a way to preserve the relationship they had once shared. Instead, it became preserving everything that still deserved protection after that relationship had reached its conclusion. Their children, their shared memories, and the dignity of a life that had once brought both of them profound happiness remained worth safeguarding. Nicole's decision to remain largely silent may have frustrated those searching for scandal, yet it also protected something far more important. By refusing to publicly catalog grievances or assign blame, she left her daughters free to continue loving their father without feeling burdened by bitterness created in the public arena. Keith's restraint appeared to reflect the same philosophy. Neither seemed interested in convincing the world that the other had failed more completely. Sometimes the greatest courage lies not in exposing every wound but in leaving quietly, without destroying everything that once mattered. Walking away without setting fire to the past often demands far more strength than seeking revenge. For Nicole, the years ahead represented yet another profound transformation. She had rebuilt her life before, but this time she carried almost 2 additional decades of memories, experiences, and responsibilities. She was no longer simply recovering from the loss of a relationship. She was redefining what home, companionship, security, and personal fulfillment would mean during an entirely new chapter of life. That transformation would not happen beneath flashing cameras or during glamorous public appearances. It would unfold through ordinary moments invisible to everyone else. A peaceful breakfast shared with family. A conversation with her daughters. Completing another demanding day of work without allowing the past to overshadow the present. Experiencing the first holiday shaped by new traditions instead of old expectations. Healing rarely resembles the dramatic moments portrayed in films or celebrated by newspaper headlines. More often, it unfolds quietly through repetition, patience, and countless small victories that no audience ever witnesses. Keith's journey would inevitably follow its own path. Throughout his career, music had provided him with a language capable of expressing emotions that ordinary conversation sometimes could not. If future songs reflected regret, gratitude, longing, acceptance, or loss, listeners would naturally search for connections to his personal life. Even then, however, no lyric could ever communicate the complete truth. Certain experiences belong only to the people who actually lived them. Perhaps that is where the story of Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban ultimately belongs. Not within rumors circulated across the internet. Not inside dramatic confessions that were never verified. Not in endless attempts to identify a single person responsible for every disappointment. Instead, it rests in a far more human understanding. Love can be life-changing without lasting forever. Keith reportedly helped Nicole believe that marriage could once again become a place of comfort and emotional safety. Nicole, in turn, reportedly stood beside Keith during one of the most challenging periods of his life, supporting him as he rebuilt his future. Whatever ultimately separated them cannot erase the impact they had on one another. They shared years that shaped both of their lives in ways neither could simply undo. Although their relationship reportedly ended differently from what either may once have imagined, its significance cannot be measured only by its final chapter. A meaningful relationship does not lose its value simply because it eventually reaches an ending. Perhaps the most important realization was never about Keith at all. Perhaps it was about Nicole herself. It may have been the recognition that she could no longer remain inside a marriage simply to preserve an image that others expected her to maintain. Protecting public perception could no longer come before emotional honesty. At the same time, choosing a different future did not require destroying the reputation of the man who had once meant everything to her. After nearly 19 years together, the final chapter appeared to be defined not by revenge, anger, or humiliation, but by acceptance. Acceptance that even the most sincere promises cannot always survive every change life brings. Acceptance that a family may evolve into something different without disappearing altogether. Acceptance that saying goodbye does not automatically prove love was false. Sometimes goodbye means something far more complicated. Sometimes it simply marks the moment when two people finally acknowledge that the future they once dreamed of together now exists only in memory, and that continuing to pretend otherwise would only deepen the pain for everyone involved.